I'm rather confused as to why we are even discussing higher towers in our neighborhood or anywhere else in Vancouver right now. I'm wondering what has put the city of Vancouver in a macroeconomic bubble from the rest of this world. Wake up, city of Vancouver. We are in a world depression. Wake up. We are in a provincial depression. We are in a North American depression. Are we going to say yes to high towers that will mean that the city will have to go out and pay for the financing of these towers eventually, like they have down the street on Main Street? Down the Main Street, there's a place called Falls Creek area, and there's a bunch of Olympic buildings that are being put up, beautiful high-end condos. And who's footing the bill for the financing of this? The city of Vancouver, and we are. Now, I ask you, how can you talk about having somebody take on high towers in this city when you've already proven on something as important as the Olympic Village? It's already been proven the financing isn't available. And all this is going to mean 16 high towers in this city anywhere means nothing more to the rest of the city than higher taxes to underwrite the cost of the financing of these things as they fall and fail one by one. Because no matter where you are in this world now, there are big projects wanting to be happening, and they are not happening because the banks have tightened the money. And if the city of Vancouver and their planners have even opened up a newspaper or gotten on the internet for 10 minutes, they'd be able to see that this is something that's going to, if they give any kind of building permits at all for something like this, it's going to mean a financial burden for the city. We're either going to have to see half-built buildings down the road somewhere, or we are going to be seeing a great big fat bill taken on like the Olympic Village is for the taxpayers. There's no money out there to underwrite these la-la land high towers. So why are you even contemplating such a thing? What put Vancouver in an economic bubble? It's not. The reality is that these high towers aren't going to go unless Wall Street says they're going to go. And if they get started, yeah, they'll get started, but live and learn. They'll start something, and then five months into it, they'll say, well, we can't finish it unless you underwrite it. Now, all the taxpayers of Vancouver have a right to be damn mad at these developers that undertake something as big as the Olympic Village and then can't follow through with their own financing. And we don't need any more of this stuff going on where we have these big ideas coming out of the blue from a few big developers that want to make a big buck. And it's left as a complete burden for the rest of the population of the city. We've had enough. And I've got one more thing to say about this, and just one last thing. If you're going to underwrite the cost of the Olympic Village, then when you're finished with it, it should all be social housing or low-income housing.
On the housing piece, where someone talked about the need for, not just 1,200 units, but rather 10,000 units. Right here. You're absolutely right. And what we need is actually a national program. And, the community had called for so long a 1% solution. 1% of the national budget to be dedicated to building affordable housing across this country is absolutely what we need. And then that in conjunction with each of the province doing their part, then you can grow your strength and your resources to build housing. The other thing that I just want to say very quickly in our platform, because I know that Laura needs to speak as well, and that is that what we also want to do is to look at all the empty buildings that are publicly owned and where they are and do an inventory of it. And then we can also look to see how we can expedite in building housing across the province with these empty public buildings. So with that, I am going to actually yield the floor because I know Laura's been sitting here very patiently. I think she deserves a chance to speak to you on the topic that is important to our community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You might or might not be aware that the Ministry of whatever it's called now, it changes names every 2 weeks it seems, Housing and Social Development, I think is something along those lines, has recently changed the way that they define homelessness for their own sort of internal purposes. And what that change has meant is that people are counted as homeless only if they have been living in public places, so the streets, for example, for more than 30 days. So if you were evicted or made homeless for whatever reason, but you've only been sleeping outside for 3.5 weeks, you're not considered homeless by the Ministry of Housing and Social Development. Nor are you considered homeless by the ministry if you don't have a home, but you have a kind friend or family member who's allowed you to sleep on their couch or a spare bedroom, for example. So what I understand that to mean is that the Ministry of Social Development and Housing carries the wait list for BC Housing, and you're given priority if you're homeless. And so if you're not counted as homeless, you don't receive that priority. And I'm not an expert on social assistance, and I tried to call someone from the ministry to just see if I could get a bit of clarity about what this actually means, and I wasn't able to reach anybody, and maybe that's not unsurprising. But there are a couple concerns about this. Number one is that it's arbitrary. Why 30 days? And why wouldn't you want to designate someone as homeless the minute they appear at your door and say, I'm homeless and I need housing? Doesn't it make sense to make sure you have all of the information that you can about them rather than drawing this arbitrary distinction at 30 days? The other concern is that this will become what the ministry says about this definition is that it's not a definition of homelessness. It's only for their internal purposes, for their computer systems and whatever, and it's not going to become a definition that's widely applied. And I hope that that's true, because when the city of Vancouver does its homeless count, it uses a much wider criteria for homelessness. And so the last count that was done in 2008 counted 2,660 people as homeless. About half of those people were quote-unquote sheltered on the night of the homeless count. If those people hadn't been counted, if the ministry criteria had been used, the homeless count would have showed about half the number of people in the count. And, I mean, homeless counts have their problems, for sure. They're not reliable, and they always produce undercounts, but at least they give a sense of the scale of the problem. And if you have a count coming back showing half the number, that's half the motivation to governments to do a better job of building affordable housing. So there's definitely a concern, and I know that Judy Graves has expressed this, a concern that the definition of homelessness will change for the city as well, that the province will try to take over the homeless count and use this new criteria for that count. And that would be a real problem, because it would mean that the numbers would go down. And Jenny Kwan just told you a lot about the government's failure over the last years to really invest in new affordable housing and to do a good job of actually reducing the numbers by reducing homelessness. So it sort of seems to me that, well, if you're not really that interested in reducing homelessness, you could at least reduce the numbers by changing the way you count people, and maybe that's going to satisfy some people. So anyway, it's something that we'll keep an eye on. Because if the method of changing how we count homeless people does change to exclude people that clearly are homeless but are couch surfing, or who just haven't been homeless for more than 30 days, if that becomes widespread, that would certainly be problematic. So that's kind of all I have to say about that. The ministry is saying it's not as big a deal as I tend to think it is, and as DERA must think it is, to have asked me to come and speak about it, but it's definitely something to watch.
Comments to Access TV at telus.net. We are not shocked.